Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on using port mirroring. At the beginning of this lab, we already need to be familiar with the concept of standard and distributed virtual switches. In this lab, we will prepare our distributed virtual switch for capturing mirrored network traffic. Then we will configure port mirroring on the distributed switch. After that, we are going to verify that port mirroring is capturing traffic. And finally, we will restore the distributed switch configuration. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on using port mirroring, so let's get started. At first, we need to go to our hosts and clusters section in our vSphere client. We are going to create an experiment between our Linux 01 and Linux 02 virtual machines. Our Linux 01 will actually capture some traffic, which will be sent by Linux 02 to some particular IP address. So now we are going to prepare them. Our Linux 01 is already launched, so let's go to its launch web console. Here we are on our Linux 01 virtual machine. Let's enable a TCP dump feature on this VM. We are going to capture only ICMP traffic right now. Now I have enabled the TCP dump system, and now we can see that there are no ICMP packets, no pings or some other ICMP packets right now, because our Linux 01 does not send any of those packets and we do not receive any of those. Now we are going to our vSphere client again. Now we are going to power on our Linux 02 virtual machine. Let's power it on. Now we need to wait a bit for this particular VM to launch. Let's go to a web console of this virtual machine. Let's swap them as browser tabs. Now we need to wait a bit to actually be able to work with this particular virtual machine. We need to wait the login prompt here. Then we are going to log in with our root credentials. Then we are going to start some ping operation on this virtual machine. And then we will continue to configure our DVS for using the port mirroring tool. So we just need to wait for maybe a couple of seconds. Now we can see that our VM is asking us to log in. Let's log in as root. Let's use our lab guide provided password. Now we are on our Linux 02 VM. Let's ping some address. Let's use our test address from our previous labs. So let it be 172.20.10.10. Let's make this ping endless so we could see the result of it a bit later. Now let's return to our vSphere client. Now we need to go to the networking section. We can go there either by clicking right here on the networking icon, or we can choose the menu and networking section here. Now we're going to capture this traffic by configuring the DVS lab specific configuration section. We're going to the DVS, we're going to the configure tab. Now we can find the port mirroring section here. Let's click on it. This page allows us to create additional port mirroring sessions. Let's click on plus icon and the word new there. Here we can choose the type of port mirroring session. We can choose either distributed port mirroring or remote mirroring source or remote mirroring destination or encapsulated remote mirroring. In this particular lab, we are going to choose the distributed port mirroring feature, but there is some additional alert for you. This particular configuration option, the distributed port mirroring configuration can only work if our source and destination objects are launched on the same particular ESXi host. Let's verify it first. So let's click on cancel. Let's go back to our hosts and clusters section. Let's click on our Linux 01 VM. Let's see that this particular VM resides on SA ESXi 04 ESXi hosts. Okay, let's go to Linux 02, and here we can see that this virtual machine is residing on the same ESXi host. So the requirement is fulfilled. Let's go back to our networking section. Again, we need to go to our DVS lab. We need to go to a configure tab, port mirroring. Let's click again on the plus sign in the new word. We are going to choose the distributed port mirroring. Let's click on next. In this particular lab, we are going to state the name as a default session spacebar 0, but in real life, we should change this name to some meaningful name for us, because there can be situations when we can have maybe tens of those simultaneously configured sessions. But right now it's okay to have a session 0 name. Let's change its status to enabled. We actually want to see the result of this particular configuration option. Now let's enable a normal input-output on destination ports. We do not want for our VMs, which will be included here in this port mirroring session, to be able only to capture traffic. We want them to be able to send this traffic, like our Linux 02 is currently sending some pings. We can verify it, that it's still trying to ping this particular 10.10 address. So let's return back. We have allowed the normal input-output on destination ports. We can actually use the next option to truncate our packets to a specific length. For example, if we want only to verify the validity of IP packet headers from our packets, and we do not want to capture any payload which can be sent with those packets. But again, here we do not need to configure it. Let's not make the enable choice here. Let's click on next. Now we need to choose the valid sources from which VMs we're going to capture some traffic. Let's click on this add new object here. Let's click on that button. Now we need to choose the source. The source is our Linux 02 VM. Let's click on it. Let's click OK. Now we're going to go next. Now we need to add a destination. Our Linux 01 will be our destination for this particular session. Let's click OK. Now let's go to our final step. We are going to create a session 0 port mirroring session. It will be enabled. Its type is distributed port mirroring session type. The normal input-output on destination ports is allowed. We want this to be allowed. There is one source and one destinations. Those are our Linux 02 and Linux 01. So let's click on finish. And now we can see that this particular session has been created. And now we can actually verify whether it's okay or not. Let's go back to our Linux 02. It is still pinging. We still continue to ping this particular 172.20.10.10 IP address periodically. Let's go back to our Linux 01 VM tab. And now we can see that this VM with its TCP dump being enabled is currently capturing some traffic from the address, which is 172.20.11.201. Those pings are sent to 172.20.10.10 and their type is ICMP echo request. So these are those actual pings. And we can see some ICMP echo reply to those pings from 172.20.10.10 172.20.11.201. We can think that this is our Linux 02 VM. So let's verify it. .11.201. Let's return to our Linux 02. Let's stop this ping by pressing Ctrl and C simultaneously. Now let's verify it by using the command which is ifconfig. And now we can see that this is our IP address 172.20.11.201. So our mirroring session is configured correctly. We can see that our pings from Linux 02 are actually captured by Linux 01. So the mirroring session is okay. Now we can stop our experimental VMs, Linux 02 and Linux 01. Let's power them down. Let's go to hosts and clusters section. Let's click on Linux 01, power shutdown guest OS to disable this VM. And let's disable Linux 02. We do not need them right now. We can wait a bit for us to be able to see that those VMs will be disabled. This process can take some time because we are trying to gracefully shut down those VMs, not just powering them off, but to allow those operating systems to correctly shut them down. We can see that Linux 01 is already shut down and Linux 02 is shut down too. Now, what we are going to do next? Our last task here is to actually undone, for us to be able to undone our session configuration. We, of course, can go back to our DVS configuration. We can unconfigure our mirroring session, which name was session 0. But for our educational purposes, let's see how we can fully restore our DVS lab configuration, our DVS, our particular DVS, to its previous state. Let's fully unwind it. For us to be able to do this, we need to go back to our networking section, which we can choose either by clicking again on our networking icon or from our menu by clicking on networking section here. Those options are the same. So let's go to our DVS lab. Let's right click on it. Let's choose the settings section. And now we're going to click on restore configuration. Let's click on it. Now we need to choose a distributed switch backup file, which we have previously created in the end of our previous lab number 3. So let's click on browse. Let's go to our DVS lab backup.zip. Let's click on it and click open. And now we are going to restore our distributed switch completely with all its port groups. Now I'm going to click on next. I can verify that I'm going to use the DVS lab backup.zip file. I'm going to restore my DVS lab. I can see the version of the switch, I can see the number of port groups, the number of app links, the number of resource pools in which this particular DVS is, with which resource pools this DVS is communicating, and the number of link aggregation groups. Both are 0 in this particular lab environment. So let's click on finish. Now we can see that the import configuration of the entity is completed. Now we can click on refresh icon on our vSphere client. Let's wait just a couple of seconds to be able to verify that this process has been completed. During this particular operation, there can be a situation when you have to restart your Firefox browser tab. It's okay, but here it seems that we do not need it. Let's verify that our DVS configuration was actually restored. Let's go to a configure tab. Next, let's go to a port mirroring section, and now we cannot see any session 0 port mirroring session which we have created during this lab, because we have restored our DVS lab virtual switch to its previous state, where that port mirroring session was not configured yet. So our lab is completed. Congratulations, you have completed using port mirroring lab demonstration video. During this lab, we have seen how and where we can prepare to configure port mirroring for capturing networking traffic, how we can verify the result of the capturing, and how we can restore the DVS configuration to return to a previous stable state of the VDS. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.